Okay, we move on to B4. So this presentation pack's been prepared by our Australian panel member, John Wright-Smith. So he's the current convener, but this morning we've got Mr. Ashish Gupta, who's also on the panel, to come in and present on behalf of John Wright-Smith.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, so John Wright-Smith's slides here. I'm presenting. I'm Ash Gupta. I'm from Siemens Energy and also a secretary for this group. So B4, if you don't know, involves in HVDC and power electronics. So that includes FACS and DC converters. We've got 36 regular members, 8 observer members, 4 additional members, and we've also got within the group conveners of B490 and B492. The technical work that's been performed recently is, or ongoing, is 3 advisory groups, 2 working groups, 4 preparatory task force, and 2 joint working groups. So that's approximately 20 experts are involved amongst these activities, and there's an NGN involvement in there as well. So our last meeting was on the Sunday, just before the Adelaide meeting. And our focus really is on dealing with the transition with the rapidly changing power system and review the scope of B4 and make sure that the scope is clear and the meetings going forward are focusing on that particular challenge ahead. For the 1 or 2 year action items for us include various touch points like hydrogen, storage, solar PV and wind, grid and flexibility, consumer participation, sustainability and climate, and grids and microgrids integration. So there's a lot of sector coupling with B4, and the thoughts in energy transition are not just limited to the power electronics devices and FACS devices themselves, but how HVDC can be a key enabler in the energy transition, how standardization is key for producing more HVDC. We're seeing in Europe, like, for example, 525 kV is becoming more of a standard. And there's also work to break that manufacturer secrecy and work together with TNSPs on projects and challenges going forward. Especially in Europe, there have been a lot of large projects and a lot of, risks taken, but those projects are now actually being commissioned, and we all have an opportunity to learn from those. In B4, we do need more experts in energy storage, as well as hydrogen. New working groups and experts in hydrogen also welcome. So in that Adelaide meeting, there was a few things that we discussed, and I'll just go through that. It's a little bit wordy, but it's obviously there for future consumption as well. So the rapid uptake of VSC, HVDC, and long-distance renewable links was discussed. There's been a clear shift towards VSC rather than line communicated, so that's LTC systems, particularly for bringing remote renewable generation into major load centers. So this trend arises because VSC offers controllability, black start capability, easier grid integration, including weak AC systems or islands, and fewer reactive power and commutation issues compared with older LCC links. We've got increasing voltages, capacities, and multi-terminal DC grid ambition was the other topic that we talked about. Globally, we are seeing HVDC links of ever higher voltage, of even beyond 800 kV, and capacity of several gigawatts, as well as growing focus on multi-terminal. So this is obviously ambitious, and there's a lot of plans in place, but still the supergrid concept of connecting different continents is in view, but it's not really in action yet. As HVDC systems age and proliferate, operational reliability is drawing much more attention, so maintenance, service life, monitoring, and refurbishment all matter. For example, there was a recent survey that tracks worldwide HVDC system performance in 2021 and 2022. So this signals that the deployment phase is transitioning towards the operate and maintenance at scale stage for overseas HVDC owners, and so that asset management and condition monitoring are key. So one study examines the thyristor aging in operational HVDC links as well. HVDC is becoming a more integral part of future grids with lots of renewables, low inertia, variable flows. The systems are being required to provide more ancillary services like stability and black start and oscillation damping, and integrate with digital tools for monitoring, analysis, and control. For example, papers in the B4 session show hybrid simulations for power oscillation for both EMT and phasor domain for damping studies in an HVDC link. So also working groups are actively working on modeling an equivalent representation of AC systems for HVDC studies. And there's a joint working group from B4 and C4 on creating AC network equivalents. There's also market and operational benefit studies that emphasize how HVDC links provide flexibility, controllability, and enable market operational optimization. Well, now onto the fax side of things. So the other things we discussed was how the fax device market is steadily growing at around 9% a year. This escalation affects increasing demand for power flow control, voltage support, grid flexibility, and the need to manage more variable energy sources. As power systems incorporate more variable renewable generation and operate with lower inertia or weaker AC systems, the utility case for fax systems intensifies. Many fax devices were installed for voltage support, reactive compensation, or line flow control. The trend now is towards system services roles like damping of oscillations, fast reactive injection, active power modulation, interactive with grid codes, and more integrated control with wide area measurements. The trend line shows strong growth in APAC as well, driven by large transmission expansion plans, renewables build-out, and grid upgrades. Also emerging, as I mentioned earlier, is the interest in asset health. Similar to HVDC, there's a focus on maintenance of power electronics heavy systems and retrofit of older fax devices and whole-of-life costs rather than just the upfront CapEx. Yep. So what's happened recently, we've published B481 and B484, and we've just finished the 60-day reviews of B471, 79, and as well as the joint working group paper on surge and extended overvoltage evaluation of HVDC cable system testing. So we're still undergoing the 60-day review of 2 other papers for guidelines for real code in EMT models, and as well as interoperability in HVDC systems based on partially open source software. The Green Book on HVDC is expected in 2025, so that's still on track for later this year. And in terms of submissions from B4 to Paris, I believe B4 had around 169 abstracts submitted, and that's still probably the highest amongst all the committees. So it's really, really active, B4 as a whole. Just skip over that. There's a lot of, as I mentioned, there's a lot of active working groups and joint working groups. You can read it in your time. But the few I'd like to highlight are B4 102, technical requirements and scenario considerations on grid forming of VSC HVDC systems, and a joint working group between B4 and C4, as I mentioned, about AC network equivalents for HVDC and fax project studies. And there's also another working group for HVDC digital twin concepts and roadmap. 2026 events, that there's going to be a Paris session, and the B4 meeting is generally actually held back in Australia once we all get back from it, so we can actually review what we all learned in Paris and what were the updates. And 2027 events, I actually don't have a list at the moment, but we will advise. Yeah, that's it for me.